Hello and welcome to Post, the channel where we discuss all things hockey. I'm Neil, and today I'm here with my father Brent, and we're here to discuss a new way of ranking teams in the NHL. Now, this isn't a suggestion for the NHL. This is just a new kind of statistic that we've come up with, or not me. He has come up with. So he's going to explain that to us today. And Dad, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you.
And can you tell me a little bit about your new ranking method?
I call it a plus-minus system. There's probably a better word for it, but it's not unlike the NHL power rankings, I guess. But that's subjectively done by people who have opinions. My model's based on straight math. You know, you have a player on the ice, for instance. He's plus or he's minus, depending on how many goals are scored for or against his team while he's on the ice. So it's easy. Doesn't always tell you how good the player is, but it's an easy mathematical number. And in my world, I rank teams the same way. It's a mathematical number. I'll have, for instance, a list of how many games a team has played, each team has played, and I'll have a list of how many points they've earned. And I just subtract the games played from the points earned, and that gets me a plus number, or in some cases a minus number for a team, and it gives me an instant snapshot of that team's strength in the standings that already takes into account games in hand and stuff like that.
Exactly.
So
using that method, we can look at each conference and we can determine who's a plus and who's a minus. So I'm just going to briefly read through. We'll start with the West. So the West is, right now, they've got Minnesota in first, Chicago, San Jose, Edmonton, Anaheim, Nashville, St. Louis, Calgary, LA, Vancouver, Dallas, Winnipeg, Arizona, and Colorado. So those are the current standings in the West from top to bottom. But when you look at the plus and minus, they actually don't align like that. With using your method, it's almost a more accurate method. So Minnesota's a plus 21, Chicago's a plus 14, San Jose is a plus 14, Edmonton's a plus 13, Anaheim's a plus 12, Nashville's a plus 7, St. Louis is a plus 4, Calgary's a plus 1, LA is a plus 3, Vancouver is a plus 2, Dallas is just 0. Winnipeg is -2 or -2. Arizona is -10, and Colorado is -18. So, using your method, we see something pretty interesting here. And Los Angeles and Vancouver, both with LA's has +3, and Vancouver has +2, and they're both ahead of Calgary, who has +1. Yet in the actual standings, they are below. They're both below Calgary, so
yeah, that's right.
Using this method, we can see that game in hands play a pretty important role.
They really do. And the mathematical model I have, it's not fancy. It's add and subtract. And the games in hand being built right in, it also factors in the likely predictability that a team is going to win some or all of those games in hand.
Right.
You know, because that's factored into how well they've done so far. It won't predict any particular game. But as we get to the East, which I guess you'll be doing next,
yes,
you know, there's a big discrepancy that we'll find where, especially now with the NHL's current approach of having these 5-day breaks, and some teams can end up playing as many as 5 games more or fewer than an adjacent team at any given date.
Yeah.
This recording's happening during the All-Star break, so things are nice and quiet for now. But you can see some teams have played 50 games and 52, and some teams have played 47, and it's all over the place. So when you have something that's all over the place like that, just looking at the raw standings and point earned, it doesn't really tell you how strong these teams really are.
Yeah, it's definitely deceiving because so we'll look at the East now and we'll continue with why it's so deceiving. Washington's a plus 23, Columbus is a plus 20, Pittsburgh's a plus 27, Montreal's a plus 15, the Rangers are a plus 14, Ottawa's plus 11, Philadelphia's plus 6, Boston's plus 4, Toronto is plus 8, Florida is plus 2, the Islanders are plus 4, Tampa Bay is 0, Carolina is plus 1, and Buffalo is plus 1, and Detroit is 0, and New Jersey is a -1. So just like the West, there are some interesting numbers here, and specifically the Toronto number of plus 8, and just above them in the standings is Boston with plus 4,
right.
And that's where the game in hands come into play here, because I think Toronto has five or six game in hands on Boston.
That's right. Toronto has 5 games in hand on the Boston Bruins, and they're only 1 point behind.
Yeah.
unless you think Toronto's going to really go on a big stink in the next 5 games, they're going to win at least one. And if they win at least one of those games, they're going to be a point ahead of Boston, which is probably where they're going to end up, and probably will win as many as 3 or 4 of those 5 games on average.
Right.
They might win them all.
Yeah.
They might go on a good run. So it just gives you a really good idea. If I was a Boston fan and saw that my team was in 3rd place in the Atlantic Division, which would qualify for the second playoffs, or the second playoff spot, or 3rd playoff spot total in the Atlantic Division, I might be pretty comfortable. But if you look at the plus-minus thing and see that Toronto actually has 4 points more than Boston in the plus-minus system, your team's got a very poor chance, all other things being equal.
Yeah.
So if everyone, like right now, Boston's played 52 games. If every other team plays enough games to get to 52 games, we'll all be 30 short of the entire season, which is 82. But Toronto will certainly be ahead of Boston at that point.
Exactly.
Were the season to end right now, they'd be toast.
Yeah, and even if they won one of the 5 of those games, I don't know how close they are in actual points, but Toronto might actually be ahead of Boston in points and plus minus, and that would really exaggerate the issue with Boston right now.
Exactly.
And, so
yeah,
it's a pretty interesting system because you get to see the real leaders of the league. Like it's pretty close. And like you said the other day to me when you explained this to me, the closer you get to the end of the season, the closer the plus minus standing get to the actual standings, because everyone gets to the same amount of games played.
That's right. Yeah, everyone's going to play 82 games, barring some disaster.
Yeah.
And at that point, if you look at last year, for instance, everyone played 82 games. Florida ended up as the leader in the Atlantic. They had a plus 21 because they had 103 points. And the amount of points you get that will determine your seeding in the league will correlate exactly with how many points more than 82 that you have. By then, it all zeroes out.
Yeah.
But as long as there are teams that don't have the same number of games played, which will happen right up until the final weekend of the season.
Yep.
The plus minus is really the better indicator of who's where.
Exactly. And so last year, like you mentioned, Florida had how many?
21.
20
plus
plus 21.
Yeah.
And we'll just jump back to Boston just because they're the issue this year. So Boston last year was, I guess, a bit of maybe in the same spot. They were kind of on the bubble trying to get in, and they had do you have their plus?
I do.
Or minus last year?
They were plus 11.
They were plus 11s, which is, I feel like that's a pretty good number.
Yeah,
but they
didn't
just
missed.
missed. Yeah, they didn't get in.
They missed because Detroit beat them, and Detroit had plus 11.
So they both had plus 11.
Yep.
But Boston was on the outside and Detroit was on the inside.
They were on the outside because they had one fewer regulation or overtime win. So one of those Boston points had they won that game in overtime, instead of winning it in a shootout, because they had 4 shootout wins. Had they won any of those 4 shootout win games in overtime, they would have had 39, which is the same as Detroit, and the tiebreaker would have transitioned to the next level down.
Whatever that is.
And Boston may or may not have won that tiebreaker. So that's how close they came. They had the same number of points as Detroit. They had plus 11, which was a total of 93 points. And in the Atlantic, 93 was enough last year to get you in, or not get you in.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have, I don't know what you have there for papers, but you have the year before that?
I do.
Can we look at the Boston again just to see?
Sure. Guess what? Boston just missed the playoffs again that year. They had a plus 14, which is
better.
Yeah. But Ottawa ahead of them had a plus 17. Detroit had a plus 18. Tampa Bay was plus 26. And my beloved Montreal Canadiens were plus 28 that year. So Boston just barely missed. They ended up with 96 points that year, which was not enough to get them in, because the other teams in their division, or their division, played better than they did. More of them.
Yeah,
more of those teams.
If we look at plus 14, so 2 years ago Boston was a plus 14.
Yeah.
So if we just go back to this year and look in the West, San Jose is currently a plus 14, and I think San Jose so far this year would be considered probably a top 5 elite team.
Oh yeah.
So plus 14 is really impressive.
Yep.
So
it's impressive because the West is a different animal. This is another thing this plus minus system allows you to do. If you have a lot of teams in the West, or any teams in the West, that have profoundly bad numbers, as Calgary, well, not Calgary so much, but Phoenix has a profoundly bad number. They're minus 10.
Yeah.
Colorado is minus 18 or whatever it is, or 16. They have profoundly bad numbers. That means some of those digits have been loaned or given to teams that are above them.
Right.
So in the East, you could have a couple of teams that are storming away with plus 25.
Yeah, exactly.
But they may not really be that much better. Because the worst team in the East might still be a +1 or something.
Yeah, and yeah, the worst team in the East right now is New Jersey with a -1.
A -1.
And like it's pretty crazy. Like the East is really competitive this year, and I think we were just looking at the standings from the past couple of years, and I think Washington, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, they had 120 points, and that could have been due to the same situation. There could have been some really, really weak teams in the East last year, or the year before, which there was. There was a lot of weak teams in the East, and this year it's transitioned to the West, and Arizona and Colorado are helping those top West teams get those extra points.
Exactly. And Washington did have 100. It was last season. Yeah. Washington had 120, plus 38.
Plus 38. Yeah.
Very dominant, of course, but we know what happened with Washington. They did not win the cup again.
Yeah, and that's a movie we've seen before. Washington wins that top spot in the East so many times in the past 10 years, and I'd say I think at least 3 in the last 7 years they've come first in the East, and they unfortunately don't fulfill their expectations in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So.
And, if you're a team that likes to hang President's Trophy banners in your rink, then they're doing great.
Yeah.
But you never see that in Montreal, or maybe no other traditional original 6 team.
Yeah.
They don't care.
Exactly.
They just want to get to the playoffs. And this system is absolutely useless to predict whatever's going to happen in the playoffs. Any system is.
Right.
This system just helps you determine what the likely seeding would really be were the season to end today for some reason.
Exactly. So like someone who maybe not a hardcore hockey fan, but we'll just say like a loosely average fan goes to the NHL.com site, looks at the standings, and I see Boston ahead of Toronto. I'm like, oh well, Boston must be a little better than Toronto. But we've dived deeper into this, and the more hardcore hockey fans would already know this, regardless of looking at this. But they know that Toronto has more games in hand, and as of right now, would be considered probably the better team.
Yeah, and if the season continues from this point to the end, and the teams have roughly the same winning record or losing record percentage as they have right now, it's going to be an Ottawa-Toronto first round.
Yeah.
And looks like Montreal will end up playing the Rangers. And it looks like no other team, including Boston, out of the Atlantic Division, is going to make it into the wild card.
Yeah.
Because the Metropolitan is so strong.
Yeah.
It looks like, once again, Boston might knock on the door and no one will answer.
Yeah, they could be very, very close. And I think if they were in that position, I think this would be 3 years in a row for Boston. And that is, I mean, as a Boston fan, you have to be pretty happy that they won the Cup a couple years ago. That was a pretty special moment for them. But 3 or 4 years later, and you've come so close to making the playoffs 3 years in a row and not made it, that would be incredibly frustrating.
Very frustrating, and you already know that some of your key players that were around maybe 3 years ago, your Seidenbergs and Lucics and people like that, they're not going to be around. They're not around now.
Yeah.
Chara's definitely not going to be better next year than he is this year.
Yeah.
And you got Marchand, you got a few other people, but it's not looking good for the future for Boston in the next few years.
Yeah.
And even if they do squeak into the playoffs somehow and reverse those numbers, I don't imagine they'll do much damage.
Yeah, they do have some really promising prospects coming up, but I don't think that they'll mature enough to really make an impact on the team for probably, I want to say, at least 3 or 4 years. So, I mean, Boston's not really one of those teams that, like, you see teams totally rebuild. Like in the late 90s or in early 2000s, Chicago went through a pretty big rebuilding situation, and they did it from the ground up, and they've won 3 cups. I don't think Boston's in that situation. They don't have to rebuild from scratch. They've got really key pieces. I mean, Marchand's having the best season of his career. And,
he was incredible, and if we look back at the World Cup, he surprised me.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Marchand fan at all. I don't like his style of play, frankly, but he became a sniper.
Yeah.
And he was amazing. I was all in for him.
Yeah, he's on fire, and I mean, they have the right pieces. Tuukka Rask is still, I want to say he's old, and I wouldn't consider him to be young, but he's still in the prime of his career. He's playing well, and Bergeron, Marchand, and they've Eriksson and Pasternak, a great young player, and they have the pieces there. They just need a few more and need a bit more maturity in their young players, and they'll definitely get better in a couple of years, and they could be one of those top teams like they were for so many years in the late 90s or not late 90s, late 2000s and early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
But so that was a pretty good example of the system that you kind of came up with, and I'm going to steal it and keep track of all these numbers, the pluses and minuses, and maybe I'll do it every weekend just to see what's changed and what's the same and stuff. And so I appreciate you sharing that bit of information with me. And so I guess that's where we'll wrap it up for today. And I think most importantly from this episode, we want to know what you guys think. Do you guys like this system? And would you do this on your own? Would you do up these numbers and see for yourself who's the real leaders and who's the deceiving losers in each conference? So tell us what you think below. And if you want to talk to my dad, he's on Twitter. So Dad, where can they find you on Twitter?
I'm at VY2HF on Twitter.
Perfect. Sounds good. So if you want to ask him any questions or make fun of him or anything like that, just send him a tweet. I'm sure he'll tweet you back and have a good exchange. Otherwise, leave a comment below, and I'll make sure I comment, and we can have a discussion if you'd like. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching this episode. I really appreciate it. If this is your first time, if this is your first video, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button down below, and we'll see you for the next video. Adios.